Welcome, welcome to our weekly book club episode here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hello. So don't let the term book club throw you off. There was no homework assignment due to tune in and listen to this episode. We promise we're not that mean. And to take the pressure down another notch, we're a pretty slow-moving book club right now.
So true, right? And seriously, thank goodness for that. I am so super struggling today. And it's one of those days, it's like for no good reason. Some days, some days you wake up in the morning and you're just like, oh, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. That wasn't today. Like I thought today was going to be fine. And then once I actually got out of bed, it has just been like some kind of shit show. Like, I don't know, like everything, everything I try falls apart no matter what I try. Like, I just don't even yeah, it has been a little brutal. I really, truly do just want to crawl back in bed and try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that may be exactly what I do after we finish recording.
Well, and I mean, full disclosure. So we're in this section of the book, which we'll intro in a second with these tilts. And so I messaged Amanda earlier and I was like, how many tilts are we recording today? And she was like, 3 or 4. And I was like, 3. Like, I've read 3. We're doing 3. I can't read one more thing. So yeah, apparently we're both just having that day/week. So we're still working our way through Deborah Reber's book, Differently Wired. There's a ton of good content in this book. It's just amazing. You're welcome to read along with us. It's definitely worth a read. Sometimes we tell you the book is not that amazing, but this one is amazing. Whether you are parenting a differently wired kiddo or not, there is value in this book. But at the same time, if you're like, my plate is already overflowing and now you're trying to give me a reading assignment, chill, lady, right? Don't stress. You can totally tune in. Consider this the Cliff Notes version or the Sparks Notes digest of the book. You can listen while you're prepping dinner, folding laundry, driving the kids around, whatever works for you. Come hang out with us.
Right? It's like the accurate version of the AI summary. We've got you. You can just listen.
Exactly.
So yeah, totally. Come as you are, read along. Don't. Truly, we really don't care. We're just glad you're here. Yeah. So today we are going to cover tilts 4, 5, and 6. So yeah, let's get to it. Tilt 4 is called Stop Fighting Who Your Child Is and Lean In. So I feel like the tilts for the most part are pretty self-explanatory with the title, but there's good stuff in there.
There's some nuance to it that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So she starts out kind of on page in this section, 114, 115. She starts with a story about a bad day that she had with her kiddo. And, kind of starts with how she tries to start and he doesn't take it well. And she's like, okay, we have to pivot. I'm going to give you a half an hour to do something. And when you're calmed down, we'll come back to it. And then he does something else for a half an hour and then they come back to it. And she tries to start again from the exact same spot. And he melts down again. And then she's like, okay, we have to pivot. You have a half an hour. And he does origami or something. And then he comes back and she tries to start again from the exact same spot. And I was really like, is this did this happen really early in her journey? Or is she using this example to help newbies feel better and see how it can be? Because I really felt like she wasn't open to changing the plan given the current state of things.
Yeah.
Just pivot more.
Pivot. Yeah, I did. I got the impression that it was from early in their journey together, right? But the interesting thing is, I made a follow-up note after that where she talks about, she says, learning to read the room and knowing when to pivot was my most valuable takeaway. But I thought about it and I was like, at the end of the day, in this particular example, they end up not doing schoolwork. They they get caught in the rain. They run home. They have hot chocolate. They have a good laugh about the whole situation, whatever, right? But I'm thinking, I feel like, and I can only really speak to American culture, but I feel like there's this big cultural push in our society to not give in, right? It's that thing, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So if you give in today because they don't want to do the thing today, or they're struggling to do the thing today, and you give in, it teaches them that if they do this every time, they'll never have to do the thing that they don't want to do, right? I feel like that's kind of the trope that we've all been given as parents. And I mean, we've talked lately, I feel like we've been unpacking a lot of things that are kind of taken concrete in our culture and in our society. And I feel like that's probably one of them to just kind of take a look at, like, where can we flex without setting bad habits and things like that? Because I think there are so many parents who would see that example and think that the parent was weak, or that she gave in and the kid won. And it's like, well, when he was melting down and she was frustrated, nobody was winning. So, but I think that that's like one of those things to look at is, is it okay if we're doing that? And if you're okay with that, great. And if you're not, maybe try to figure out where your comfort zone is, or where you might be able to flex a little bit, because we do have to be able to pivot. I totally agree.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's an interesting point because I know for me, I absolutely believe that there are situations and certain people that are in my orbit, right? That like if you give them an inch, they take like a marathon, not even a
Yeah.
mile, right? Like they just like go all the way. You're like, wow, boundaries much, right? So I do believe in that saying. And I also believe, yeah, that thing, like you want to be careful about not like setting or allowing bad habits because it is our job as parents to, you know, teach life skills and things like that. But also, yeah, I looked at this example and I was like, wow, like the pivots were like in my mind, the pivots were maybe like 5%. And you probably would have been successful with like a 45% pivot at least, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's probably one of those things that, yeah, as a parent, you really have to unpack and figure out which ones, like which times, which ones, which things, which
Right.
situations, you will let go because it's not that it's not even worth the fight. Like there's just no need for it to be a
Right.
fight, like versus the ones that are worth like, well, yeah, no, this really matters and we need to work on this. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think I saw you typing notes earlier. I know you've got one of those later on, so I'll bring it up then as an example.
Okay. All right. The next thing that I had is in a section called When We Lean In. And which reminds me of Sheryl Sandberg, who used to be at Facebook. She's got that whole
Well,
lean in movement thing for
yeah.
feminism.
Hmm.
So there's a thing here in the Kindle book, it's on page 117. And I really liked this quote because it reminded me of my oldest kiddo. Sometimes you try to explain to people an experience that you have and you don't do it eloquently, and you just feel like you're not doing a good job of like truly relaying the experience that you had. And so this was beautifully written. And I was like, yes, this is that thing. This is what we did. So it says, when we stop fighting and surrender to who our child is, everything suddenly begins to get easier. Our child gets to be who they are without receiving the message that they're doing it wrong or that they're annoying or frustrating. Over time, they feel more confident in who they are and may begin recognizing their personal strengths while feeling inspired to work on areas of weakness as they grow. And I will say, we've talked about this in our Facebook group and stuff like that, but when we let go of all of the therapies, and I'm not saying I'm anti-therapy, try the therapies, maybe they'll work. For us, they were not working. We were just endlessly frustrated with having to keep the schedule of the therapies. And then you're trying to do the OT work in between and the vision therapy homework in between. And it was just like, oh, and we weren't getting anywhere. I mean, we were getting nowhere fast. When we let go of that, in other words, stop fighting and surrender to who my child was and what their natural abilities are and what their limitations are, the kid blossomed, like absolutely blossomed. And he is the funniest, most sarcastic, most, he comes across as very confident. I mean, there's a teen thing there where, like, I think all teens feel like weird and awkward and whatever, but generally speaking, he carries himself in such a beautifully confident way. And he definitely has limitations, but he's just like, this is who I am, right? He's found that take me or leave me earlier than I think most human beings do. And the visible change in him when we let go of all of that stuff that we were trying to square peg round hole completely. I mean, just huge, 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 huge. So I would highly recommend if you're at that point. I'm not saying don't try the therapies. Maybe you'll have great success. But if you're at a point where things just aren't jiving, it's okay. it's okay to cut and run. It's all good.
Yes.
Okay, now for the next few pages, I do not have page numbers because for whatever reason in my Kindle, it goes from page 117 to 121. And so I don't really know, but I tried to kind of line up with your notes, Amanda. So hopefully I'm kind of on track. But on the top of what is labeled page 121, and right above where it says embracing the tilt, there's a mantra here, which is accept, accommodate, and advocate. And it says when we accept that our child needs a full 10 minutes to put their shoes on and get out the door, not only do we feel calmer during those transitions, but our children don't feel our frustrated energy. And our parent child dynamic can remain positive and respectful. And I've talked before about the fact that when my youngest kiddo was struggling, we would use mantras. We used like kind and calm was a big one that we used. So I just love because I feel like when you're in these moments that get really stressful and really like, right, it's really hard to think clearly. And so having these pre-programmed mantras to me really helps. So I like accept, accommodate, advocate. It's like, oh, I'm going to plant that little state there and keep that. That's helpful.
Well, in that same section, what that I pulled out, so it is on page 118 that we're on
Thank you.
now, if you're following along in the book. And again, we're in the section called When We Lean In. She gives a story about processing speed disorder, and she's pointing out that it can't actually be cured, right? Because there's no way to actually speed up a slow processing speed. And I thought that was such an important point because not all, but so many kids who get any kind of a diagnosis of a learning difference or a learning disability or wherever you are in that whole realm of things, they're very likely to have a slow processing speed or slow working memory or a lower working memory score or a combination of both. And the internet is full of stories of like how to fix this and games to play to fix this and, exercises and therapies and things you can do. But if you dig a little deeper, you find all of this research that's like, I mean, you can try all of that, but there's absolutely nothing that shows any of it makes any difference. It's so like, why are you going to first off, you're going to be frustrated. It's going to be hard. Second off, you're going to be doing these things. Your kiddo's not going to be improving and they're going to be thinking, what's wrong with me? Why don't these things work for me? And it's like, oh, well, because, research says they don't work for anyone, but keep trying. It's, and it's like, why set your kiddo up for this level of failure and your family up for this level of frustration? I mean, obviously, like, accommodate when necessary, work on specific things and skills when helpful, but like just learn how to embrace it. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know what that really looks like, but I got that score report, like I got that on our report, go into Google and like just research, like, what does this look like? There are a couple of really awesome kind of fictional stories out there about like this third grade boy with slow processing speed and a day in his life and all of the not mistakes, but like the things that adults are like, why can't you do this? And why don't you have this? And it explains from his point of view, like why this took longer and why this happened and how, like it's so insightful. So if you've got a kiddo and you're trying to really understand or figure out how you embrace it, go read some of those like kind of fictional stories that walk adults through what it actually means. I think they're super helpful.
I love those. Yeah, there's quite a few that I've watched related to ADHD, autism, things like that, where people who experience the world that way share their insights at such a level that you're like, thank you. I mean, it's still not the same as experiencing it, but it's probably as close as you can get, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
I liked it. Okay.
So yeah, just a little bit later on that page. So yeah, on 118, again, we start a new section called Let Yourself Mourn. Now, I know we talked about this last week. So if you missed last week's episode, we had this whole discussion. Like Meagan felt like mourning was too strong and like, like just sets it up in this, like just a really negative light. And so my thing was, I was like, well, for me, it works. Like, I think of it as like the 5 stages of grief and the grieving process. And, one of those, I have lots of ways that I've had to deal with that. Like, as a person with chronic illness, a lot of my life is about like the grieving process of like letting go of the things that I thought would happen or the things that I thought would be easy, and like learning how to have that grieving process and then embrace where I'm like accepting what it is and embracing my new reality. The same with infertility, right? Like we really thought we would have a bigger family. We have only one child. I absolutely love that child. He's absolutely amazing. And at this point, I wouldn't change anything. I love having just my single solo travel buddy, and we get to do so many things. But there was a really big grieving process in there, in that mix of like letting go of the idea of all the siblings he was going to have and learning how to embrace just an only child, right? Like, so for me, this idea isn't necessarily new, but that's where I'm coming at it with this book. And so feel free to see it from either one of our perspectives, right? But that's what she's talking about, right? And so then on page 120 for me, she she kind of summed it up with this quote that says, "There's no shame in feeling sadness or mourning what isn't. In fact, by giving it a voice and letting it know we see it, our sadness loses its hold over us and we're freer to lean in." And
Mhm.
for me, that just kind of like summed up the thing nicely, that, that approach in life where like you can keep railing against the fact that it's unfair that something is like this, or, railing against the fact that it shouldn't be like this. But like, what's the point? Like you can't let something go when you're constantly fighting against it.
Mhm. Yeah, I read this through the lens of what you shared last week when we talked about grief. So it made like because when we first read the grief thing last week, I was like, "Whoa." But I did like the line here where it said, "Some may say mourn is too strong a word when referring to letting go of this vision, but I think it fits." And it was so funny because when I saw the title that said "Let Yourself Mourn," I was like, "Ah, we're mourning this week." Right. Yeah. But I did read it through the perspective that you shared last week. And so I didn't take it in the same way. It was like a more balanced, it's like, oh, okay. Like for me, it is a strong word, but I can understand how you're applying the word and that makes sense too. And at the end of the day, I don't think the intent is negative towards people who are neurodivergent. So that's
Yeah.
really all I care about. So like last week when we talked about the tilts, there's kind of this pattern that we follow. So on page 119, there's this reflect box that says, what aspects of who my child is am I not fully accepting? What implicit biases might I have with regard to neurodiversity? In what ways, if any, am I secretly hoping an issue, trait, aspect of who my child is will eventually go away, or that he or she will ultimately become normal? And I thought that that one was, so essential. Like that would be something that I would think on every night for a month going to bed. Like if you're new to this world of diagnoses land, like I would do that every night when I lay in bed for like 20 minutes and just sit there and be like, okay, because I think it'll change as you continue to think about it. Those were some powerful questions I thought, which was pretty cool.
Okay. So yeah, then that brings us on page 120 to the kind of next section. The header is called Recognize When You're Fighting Reality. And like she just, for me, she kind of summed it up in, she's like telling this different stories and examples, right? And she says examples of like where she's with her husband and he's like, oh, he shouldn't get so angry when it's time to stop playing that game. Or if I tell him to stop doing something, he should stop doing it. And her point is that, and I would agree, it's like that, well, okay, fine. Maybe those statements are accurate. Maybe in an ideal world, we wouldn't have a meltdown when we say, okay, it's time to stop playing the game. But the reality is that's what's happening. And so like, let's operate from a place of like, this is the reality and how are we going to move forward instead of being like, well, it shouldn't be that way. So I'm going to keep doing what I think it should be. Like, what is the point? Like, seriously, why? So it's like, this key should fit in this lock. So I'm just going to keep ramming it in there and trying to turn it. And I don't care if it breaks off in the lock. It should fit in there and it should work. Like that makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great analogy. I like that. Yeah, so she's got some examples here from this woman named Angela Pruis, a parenting coach and a mom of a differently wired kiddo, where she talked about the controlling route. And we've talked about control so many times in so many topics, right? Because again, to the point that I made earlier about not pivoting because it means that they've won, that you're weak, that they're gonna take a mile, all of that. Right. I feel like control is tied into all of that, right? That you will lose the control and the kid will run amok and you'll never be able to put the horses
Yeah.
back in the barn and all that kind of stuff. But there was a thing here where she talks about, she's got a strong willed kiddo and all of that. But she says working together instead of against each other really becomes their win. And I've talked about that before with my youngest. That was a game changer for us, was realizing that he needed a partner, not a disciplinarian or he needed a buddy. He needed to know, he was like, like, he was too little to be like, I am struggling as fuck. And like, could somebody please help me? Right. Like, and so once I figured that out and was his buddy, he was like, oh, thank God, because I was really struggling. Right? So when we figure that out, it works pretty well for them. So on 121, there's a section called Reframe What Is. And she talks about taking note of the things that are grating to us about our kiddos' behavior, whether they're interrupting, fidgeting, dilly-dallying, talking too loudly. Oh my gosh. I have a thing that pops up on Facebook every year that says like some people learned their inside voice on a helicopter while operating a chainsaw or something. Like I have that. And then I have another one. We were at a market one time and my kiddo was holding up this sign that says, I have no inside voice. It was like a little thing. And I was like, I didn't say it. You did. Like I did not. So it says like, take those things and reframe them, not as conscious choices, but rather the manifestation of who our child really is. And then a little while down, it says when we reframe what is, our child can spend less time in defense mode and more time feeling secure about who they are. And I just thought, like, imagine how exhausting it is. We talk about masking all the time with neurodivergence. And I think that's kind of the same concept here, right? When you're constantly in defense mode, feeling like the way that I naturally exist is annoying to other people or is societally unacceptable. So I must constantly be aware of that and working on that. Holy cow. And then there's no energy left to do anything else, to focus, to build relationships, to do any of that stuff because they're in that defense mode. So I liked that little call out there.
And see, for me, it was poor timing because I had just read this section last night. And then I went into the kitchen to take the medicine I have to take right before bed. And I got tripped up in a book bag that was laying across the walkway in the kitchen that I couldn't see in the low light. And I thought I broke my toes, which would not be the first time I've broken my toes on my kiddo's stuff because that's how he operates. And I was like, I don't really think I can embrace that. I'm just going to put that out there.
Hang your fucking backpack up, okay?
Like, you don't have to hang it up. Just push it to the side, not like right in the middle. Like, I'm not even that anal. It's truly just lean it against the wall, but not like it was open. The straps were everywhere. It was completely wrapped up around my foot. My foot still is killing me today. I don't think they're broken. They're uncomfortable, but like I said, I've broken my toes on more than one occasion, thanks to children. So I'm pretty familiar with that. They don't feel broken, but yeah, I was a little like, when do you draw that line between like the way that you are is actually like that part's not working? Like I love you.
Hazardous to my health.
I love you with my heart and soul, but I would like fewer broken bones.
I'm guessing kiddo heard about that one.
Yeah, he came out to see what was wrong because it was cursing. I won't unleash it completely because we have the adult rating, but we want to be careful with that. I mean, it's important to remember that we live in a quite small space. And so there really are main walkways, like when you're apartment living, condo living, right? It's not big open areas. And so it was essentially like the doorway, like there was a booby trap in the doorway. I'm living in an episode of Home Alone, a homeschool version. I don't know. Like it's not as good as the first one, that's for sure. All right, so that brings us to page 122 with a new section that's called Actively Appreciate. And in this section, I liked the pro tip box that she had. Like a lot of her call out boxes are pretty solid. So it just says, develop a soundbite that reframes the way you introduce your child, emphasizing his or her strengths. And she's an example of someone who's like, oh, like this person failed school and was terrible at this thing and they were awful at that. And they really struggled to get through this and all this. Oh, and by the way, they spent almost a year living on the International Space Station, but they're like, no one would get to the last sentence because you would have skipped that part and moved on to the next entry. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty good analogy. Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about it in a lot of different ways, but it's always a good reminder.
I literally had this today because we had to go to the doctor today. My youngest kiddo has ear infections upon ear infections. And I was anxious about having to explain my kiddo to a new doctor. We went to an urgent care here in Portugal. So they speak English. It's this like concierge medical thing, which isn't as expensive as it sounds because it's Portugal. It's really inexpensive. Actually, it's less than what it would cost to go to a regular doctor in the US. But they speak English there and it's like a whole thing. So anyway, but like they're not, I don't want to paint Portugal with a broad stroke. Generally speaking, though, it's not as up to date on neurodivergence as we are in the US, or definitely not in the UK and things like that. So I was like, how on earth do I explain to this doctor that you need to look at his ears, but he doesn't like to be touched, and that his pain threshold is negative 5,000? I mean, everything hurts him to a degree that is so extreme. And so it's been very difficult in the past with ear infections for pain management because he's been on Toradol drips in the emergency room for basic ear infections. And I don't want to sound like some drug seeking mother when I try to explain this to people, you know? And so I had just read this morning and I was like, okay, I'm going to explain this in a way that is pro kiddo, but still somehow hit this home. And I really did. I reframed it a little bit differently than I typically might have in the moment, just to like practice what she was talking about here. But thankfully our appointment went pretty well. So not too bad. The doctor got
Double
it all.
win.
Yeah,
double
right.
win.
Double ear infections too. So yeah, good stuff.
That's double. Fantastic. Okay, so that wraps us up. Tilt 4 means that we are moving on to tilt 5, which is called parent from a place of possibility instead of fear.
Yeah. I have a lot of notes here because I changed fear in a lot of cases for anxiety because I don't really feel like a very fearful person, but I'm anxious as hell, right? So there's this whole passage here on 124 that says, fear wraps our bodies in clothing. Love allows us to stand naked. Fear clings to and clutches all that we have. Love gives all that we have away. Fear holds close. Love holds dear. Fear grasps, love lets go. Fear rankles, love soothes. Fear attacks, love amends. And this was from a book. I have not read it. We are a secular podcast. It's a book by this person named Neil Donald Walsh, and it's called Conversations with God. So I don't know how, I'm assuming it's a religious book. I don't, just based upon the title, but I don't know. But I did like that quote. And I thought for me, like I would just change that to like anxiety in all forms, because I feel like fear and anxiety are like cousins, but not entirely the same. And so I really liked that.
Brother and sister.
There you go.
Closer than cousins. Yeah. And for me, I thank you Inside Out too. I think that's when we learn anxiety. I'm not sure, but yeah, like I think that's true. That yeah, you could totally read this as like fear/anxiety, and it applies in both cases, right? Like,
yeah. And then it was interesting because she goes on in this later section, I think it's page 125, where she says, when it comes to fear and our children, the struggle is real. I mean, there's so much to be afraid of. And she has example questions here, like, am I screwing my child up? Will he ever be able to insert verb here? Am I doing enough to help him or her? I'll skip a couple so I don't take forever, but what will happen if my partner and I don't make it? What will happen when our child becomes an adult? The ultimate, will things always be hard? And it's interesting because I am beyond wound like a spring all the time. But these are things that I actually am not fearful about now. But I know that I had some of these fears at the beginning when I started homeschooling. And we had a post like this in our Facebook group not that long ago where the person was like, how do you let go of the, am I doing enough? And I think it just comes with really being very conscious of mental noting the successes. When you see it working, be like, it's working, right? I'm watching it right now. This is, the proof is in the pudding. It's working right now. And then I think the more you cement those moments, the less these fears become for many people. You could be like me, where I'm very anxious all the time, and there's no amount of logic that's going to overcome that. So maybe there's no amount of logic that will overcome your fear, and that won't work. But I think generally speaking, kind of doing that might be a helpful activity.
Yeah. And I am going to preface this whole section with the fact that generally speaking, I don't struggle with anxiety or kind of the fear-based thinking. Perhaps I should more, but I don't. And
You hang
so
out with me a little longer. I might be able to get you there.
we'll see. I've spent years letting go all kinds of things. So yeah, if I totally missed the boat on something, like send me a message, let us know. Like, oh, I think maybe you misunderstood, or like you should really consider it from this perspective. I'm always open to that kind of stuff. In fact, I totally thrive on that. Like, I love when I hear about other people's experiences that are different from mine and that push me to think of a perspective that I had never thought of before. I love that. And I know that makes me a little weird, but I really do force me to think about walking in your shoes when I didn't even know you had a pair of shoes for me to walk in. Okay, so on page 126, she kind of wraps up this first section with this quote that I thought was just pretty powerful. She says, operating from fear leads to more limited thinking and fearful energy, which both we and our child will feel. And it's less chance our child's uncovering and experiencing their extraordinary possibilities. It's the epitome of self-fulfilling prophecy. And I did think that that was true, right? Like we talk about that in our home all the time. Like if you keep saying negative things about yourself, they're going to come true. Like it's just so important to make sure that you're talking to yourself the way that you would talk to your best friend, which presumably is lifting them up instead of tearing them down. And if you're tearing them down, maybe work on that.
Your best friend. Yeah.
Yeah. And just that thing of like, what we say to ourselves really does matter in that self-talk. And so, yeah. Okay. So that brings us to the next one on page 127. Well, it's just the very bottom, 126, but basically page 127 is called The Power of Possibility. She talks about a life coach and author who is talking about weaving the word maybe into her everyday vernacular and how it just helps her see how a situation could unfold. And that's like a more positive approach than being certain something won't work. Like, well, this could happen, like maybe this happens, or maybe it happens this way. And that maybe like works. I liked it because I use maybe like for real. That came up. I think maybe it was in our Facebook group as well, where someone had like posted about, like you're never more sure the answer is no than a mom who says maybe. And I like actually asked my kid, I'm like, I don't think I do that. Do I? And he was like, no, when you say maybe, it really means like you're going to think about it and decide, where it depends on what happens throughout the day. And I was like, that's what I thought. Like maybe I use maybe a lot because, yeah. So I was like,
I
yeah,
totally did that when my kids were younger. And I know it because we were at my cousin's house and one of my kids I think it was one of my kids brought something up. And in any event, one of the kids at the table, whether it was my kids, my cousin's kid, brought something up and I said maybe. And one of my kids turns to the cousin and goes, that means no, we're not doing that thing.
yeah.
Cracked up. I was like, oh, boom. Yeah, okay. It did. But yeah.
I worry about it too in our Facebook group when we're having discussions, when someone will post a comment that I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. Like I need to think about that because like I said, I just really love when someone pushes me to think about something I've never thought about before, like presenting new information that I just never heard. I will almost always reply with like interesting, like, and interesting for me is like truly like interesting. I'm gonna noodle on that for quite a while. I'm gonna think
Yeah.
through that. But I think that so often people who don't listen to our podcast and don't understand my personality think it's a really dismissive, like, oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Like, no,
Right.
I'm really like, interesting. I don't know. Like, this is what I was thinking. And I was coming from this perspective. Like, so it's interesting that you came from that one. And really, I'm going to be thinking about that later that night when I'm trying to go to bed. And yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That's those gaps in written communication, though, where you can't get the
Mhm.
nuance and stuff like that. And that's what causes disconnect sometimes when people perceive things differently. So,
Yeah, for sure. Another kind of thing in general with this section, the power of possibility, I just felt like the whole section was a little bit like yes and no for me. There's definitely a time and a place for accepting negative reality. I just think sometimes you have to make decisions based on a reality that you don't really like. If you know, like you're thinking about something and you look at the pros and cons list, or you weigh all of the possibilities and it's like a 20% chance that it'll work out and an 80% chance that it'll be way worse if you make this change. Like, I'm not making big changes on those odds. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll just stick where I am. Like where I am is not perfect, but like I'm not making big changes when I've only got a 20% chance of improving where I am. I'm like, I'm good. And I didn't necessarily get that out of this section. This section felt really like, make the changes. It might be okay. And like, again, I'm all about might and maybe, right? Like I always say I can try anything once, oftentimes twice, just to be sure it wasn't a fluke the
Yes.
first time that it went wrong, but also there's like a little bit of being a grown up and admitting that like not everything is going to turn out well. And the numbers aren't always in your favor, right?
Cut your losses.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I liked on 127. She has, I think, which is where you are possibly. I don't know my page numbers. Anyway, there's a quote here that says, I won't mince words. For us to do what's best for our kids, we need to stop making decisions out of fear. And I just thought, like, that's something I don't struggle with fear as much as I did way back in our early days of homeschooling. But for me, like in the early days of homeschooling, I needed that like taped up on my refrigerator or something, right? Like as an hourly reminder that weigh the pros and cons, be logical, but then do the thing if it makes sense to at least give it a try. So I really liked that quote. Then we go to 128. So is this the one that you were talking about earlier where you said there's an example in my notes later? Is this the one you were referring to? Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of thought so. I was like, I have the feeling she's talking about the teeth brushing. Okay. Is teeth brushing an issue in your house, like from a sensory perspective?
It was a little. It's not now. We've gotten to a much better place. We had a situation where our dentist was really adamant when we started seeing a dentist. They were like, "Oh, you need to continue helping and like redo it until they're 8." And then once he turned 8, they were like, "Make sure you continue doing it until they're 10." And that was like a lot, right? And there was just, like finding the right toothbrush and finding the right toothpaste and like learning, learning different things. It's generally much better for us now, but I know a lot of people who have it far, far worse, right? And really like don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I moved to Europe with about 35 tubes of Tom's of Maine silly strawberry fluoride free toothpaste because that was the only way teeth were getting brushed for one of my kids. So, and I'm not even sure silly strawberry is like an effective toothpaste, but it's the one we've got. So
That was ours forever. And only just in the last like couple months, he was like, I don't like that anymore. And so now we're kind of on a new, like, he's not been fond of any of the other many ones that I bought in travel size. So I'm not 100% sure what we're going to do there. But yeah.
well, it's not friendly for travel size, but I do have one kiddo who likes to make their own toothpaste. It's like, she's very much ready for the hippie commune. She makes like baking soda and xylitol toothpaste and whatever. So you never know, but it's not travel friendly at all. I'll tell you that much. There's a lot of coconut oil involved. So I love it. It's definitely not possible. But anyway, there's a section here called Get It All Out on the Table. And she gives us this scenario, this woman, Caitlin, whose daughter had always hated brushing her teeth and all this kind of stuff. She refers to it as the teeth brushing tango with her 4-year-old daughter, who would say no brushing. And it got to the point where the kid like threw the toothbrush at the mother, and the mother was kind of taken aback and then was like, well, hold on. She doesn't really have another way to express how she feels about brushing teeth. So this is just the way she's done it. And I was like, oh, and then I was like, next paragraph. Excellent. Let's see what she suggests for how to brush teeth. There's no suggestion. I was like, so the mom gets pelted with the toothbrush. The kid doesn't want to brush her teeth. And then we just changed the subject. Right. And I was like, what happened here? Like, we're having Deborah Reber on as a guest. I'm asking, I'm going to be like, in that situation, what are you doing? You're just letting the kid's teeth rot out of the head. Like, I'm not sure what we're doing here. Right. Like, what's happening? So that was my kind of big note there was what happened there.
Yeah. That's an interesting one though. Like teeth, right? We just had one of our dental appointments and well, the last one I went to, my husband took him this most recent time. And the time before I went, the dentist was like, okay, mom, like just on the back teeth, you really need to make sure that you get in there and do a better job on the back teeth. And I was like, don't talk to me about it. Like he's almost 11. I'm not brushing his teeth anymore. Like homeboy's got to figure out like what to do. So explain to him and help him understand. Like the number of times I've stood in the bathroom at the mirror with him and shown him how to do it, like on my own teeth and like done it on his teeth so he could feel what it looked like and like tried. I'm like, so at this point, like you're the professional. Impress upon him the importance of doing it. Like I don't like you don't need to lecture me about getting the back teeth.
My back teeth are great. Yeah.
Like, wrong person.
I'm good. Yeah. So I'm going to be interested to ask that question when Deborah Reber joins us. I'm going to be like, what just happened there? Because I noticed we just changed the subject real quick. But then there was a line here at the bottom of page 129 that says, but fear isn't logical, it's primal. And I was like, again, for me, it's anxiety, but like, there's no amount. I mean, I know the stuff that I'm worrying about is ridiculous, doesn't stop the fact that my brain still circulates on it again and again and again and again. In this case, she's talking about how people try to logic away their fear and it doesn't work because it's a visceral response. And so she's talking about having a physical reaction to it as far as like breathing and all sorts of stuff, which I thought was really helpful there to kind of break it down.
Yeah. In that same section, she says, what are your greatest fears involving your child? I'm talking super irrational, nightmare inducing, worst case scenarios. And then she like suggests, she goes on to say, like, give them a voice to make them less powerful and all of that kind of stuff. And like, generally, I agree with that. But then I really struggled with the activity. Did you try doing this? It's just that, like, say out loud your greatest fears involving your child, like
Yeah, I
just
didn't
to
do that.
like say them and get them out there. And I was like, I don't know. I don't think I really have any good ones. Like, so I don't know if that just means that I'm like evolving in my parenting process, or maybe I'm just super like stunted and can't accept and acknowledge my greatest fears. I'm not sure where I fall on that.
You're like, everything's great. And it's like that.
Yeah, either one. Like, let's be real. It could go either way.
But I feel like, I mean, we did this whole thing about unschooling and math, right? And I kept saying like, there's this whole like, you just have to let go and trust the process, right? And watch it work. And so I feel like there's no way that you could do that with your kids' education if you were operating from a place of fear when it comes to that. I mean, how do you just let go and trust the process when you're, so for me, I really feel like I just don't have a lot of these when it comes to like their viability as human beings, their education, there's like feeling okay. I really am.
Yeah.
To your point, I could be completely delusional and completely screwing this whole thing up, but feeling okay.
I'm sitting here thinking of some that I know you've said before. And I'm like, but I'm nicer than that. I know it's late for you where you are and you're going to want to go to bed after we're done recording. So I'm not going to put those in your brain.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I got your back. Okay. So we're on page 130 and she's quoting another coach, author, person that she's interviewed on her own podcast called Kate Swoboda.
What is that?
I don't know. I'm sorry. If you're listening and you care, I'm sorry. So she says, the quote is, fear thrives when we are isolated, thinking we're the only parents who have encountered a particularly difficult situation, or fearing that if others know that we struggle, they'll judge us. In truth, absolutely every parent encounters bad parenting days and makes mistakes. Connecting with other parents who are willing to be open about that will leave you more likely to reach out than to keep repeating the same frustrating cycles. And that just really kind of hit home for me. We've had just yesterday, we had this amazing conversation with hundreds of comments in our Facebook group where women are talking about their struggles with early days of parenting and those kinds of things. And I just think that like creating that community and sharing the struggle so that we can not feel alone and acknowledge where we're at is such an important part of resistance right now. And yeah, I just like, yeah, right on. I'm here for that. And then she wraps up this tilt with a section called Get Your Brave On. And, it's a little bit of a silly header or whatever, but I did like the fact that they define bravery similarly to courage, with that idea of like, you feel the fear or the anxiety and you do it anyway, right? Like that's what being brave is, not the lack of fear, but the fact that you feel it and you still do it.
There's
Well,
a sorry. There's an influencer, Elise Myers. Do you know who she is?
yeah.
On like Instagram and stuff. She has that thing because she's an exceptionally anxious person. And people say, "Oh, how do you do this if you're so scared?" And she's like, "I do it scared. I just do it scared." And that's become like one of her slogans.
Yeah. No, for sure. And so then that we'd like to wrap up each one. The tilt has a start now box, right? So if you're listening and following along, this tilt says, tackle a major or minor child related decision by tuning in, determining the best choice from the perspective of love and possibility, and trusting in what could be by embracing that choice.
Which is a good finish to this one.
Okay, so that was the end of the second tilt for the day. Before we go into the next one, we just want to share a little bit more about one of the favorite things that we get to do each week. So don't get me wrong, we do love podcasting. We come here and do it at least once or twice a week. And then we definitely enjoy hosting our Facebook group. It's an unwieldy beast sometimes, but we absolutely enjoy doing that. And we like being able to meet our Patreon peeps. Like for sure, we get to do that twice a month. That's definitely fun. But there's just something super special about getting to spend one-on-one, or in some cases, two-on-one time with parents, right? It allows us to just really get to know them a bit, understand their kiddos' like unique needs, and then go really deep and specific with advice, ideas, and like even suggestions for opportunities and things like that. So we thought we'd share some feedback from a recent session, obviously shared with permission from the parent who did the session and gave the feedback. So she said, quote, I'm newer to homeschooling and still just kind of trying to figure it all out. I had been having my son use time for learning, and it was just okay for him. He has ADHD and has formed an aversion to quote unquote school from being in public school from pre-K to the start of fourth grade, and experiencing struggles with trying to do traditional school while having a differently wired brain. I kind of knew I wanted something different for him, but I didn't know what that would look like until I found the Homeschool Moms Unfiltered podcast. I mean, hello, yay, go us. Like that's in and of itself, that's an awesome, like little, yay. But she goes on to say, I ended up booking a call with Meagan, and I was blown away by the plethora of creative ideas and resources she had to share with me related to project-based learning and unschooling. All of it sounded like it would work way better for my son. So much so that I canceled our subscription for Time for Learning right after we got off the call. And I was so excited to hear more that I joined Meagan and Amanda's Patreon just to continue learning from them. Like, I know it sounds silly, but when people say these nice things about what we're doing, it just feels so good, right? Like a year ago when we decided to do this, the whole goal was that like maybe some people would get something out of it. And you assume when you see the numbers going up each week and, you're like making it on the how-to top charts and these kinds of things, like you assume it's resonating with people. Like people wouldn't keep downloading it and listening to it if it wasn't resonating. But it just feels so good when they actually tell you, right? Because like podcasting is like a weird thing, right? You like just put it out there on the internet and then occasionally people send you nasty messages telling you that you're a horrible person. And so it's really nice when those get balanced out with these really lovely like, messages and feedback, right? Okay, so if you're at all interested, we use like a Calendly is what it's called, but it's a calendar. We'll pop the link in the show notes and it's on our website and wherever else. You can totally go in there and book time. You can book for everything from handpicking curriculum, right? Or an in-depth discussion about online options versus the different paper ones versus the print ones. You can do building a transcript or how to take your portfolio and vision boards into a transcript. You can do I've decided to homeschool, but beyond that, I have no idea what I'm doing. Please help. we have all of those things, and they're broken down really easy to figure out how to book that on that service that we use. So feel free to go and have a look. We would really love to meet you, and yeah, and just to help and support you as much as possible.
Yeah, totally agree. We love all of it, but it's a fun part of the week when we get our sessions in and all that kind of stuff. I'm always like, especially if they're late at night, I'm jazzed. And then I struggle to go to bed afterwards because I'm like still thinking of ideas. And then
Yeah.
usually I end up sending people messages afterwards. I'm like, I thought of something else. And you know, like, I found this
Yeah.
resource online because I think Facebook was listening to us. And so here I found this resource and it looks pretty interesting. I started vetting it for you. Yeah.
I
So
know.
it's pretty
Can,
awesome. We love it.
yeah. Can I just say how many times I've walked past my Alexa saying the same couple of things over and over so that eventually I'll get a Facebook ad for what it is I want? Like, I know there's got to be a resource out there that's blah, 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 So I'll be like, fine, what or what? Wouldn't it be nice if we never
If
fails?
only.
Yeah. She serves it right up within a day or two. I've even had success with like coupon codes for things doing that, right? Like, I wish I could find a coupon code for blah, blah, blah. You go over and then I get it. And that's perfect.
That's fantastic.
If they're
I
going
know.
to listen to us all the time, at least make it work for you.
Exactly, right? Yeah. If you can't fight them, join them or whatever, right? Yeah. I love it. All right. Well, you mentioned that we have one more tilt. We plan to do tilt 6 today, but guess what? We have gone quite long. This is not a
That
new
never
phenomenon.
happens.
Yeah,
That
right.
never happens to us. We're not
possible.
here for both.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many people homeschooling their differently wired kids, and we are obviously two of them. And then, there's so many people in our community that we're having such extended conversations in our Facebook community. After these episodes drop on Thursdays and Fridays, the conversation is continuing over there. Like, it really does seem to be resonating. So I don't even feel guilty that we're going long and taking like 9 months to read this book. That's the longest we've ever taken to read a book, I think. So
It
I
is
don't even
shockingly
feel
long
bad.
for us, but it's true. And I mean, it would be a real shame to like try to shove it in and then have to really edit out the stories and stuff that people are like, oh, yeah, that happened to me. Or, like, again, that thing of like building community. Like, of course, we want to share the book with you, but we also want it to be another chance to feel seen and heard. So
Yeah.
we are going to take a note from Tilt 4 and we're going to pivot. Pivot. Yes, we're going to pivot and we'll get to Tilt 6 next week.
Yeah. And I love that we realized it now because sometimes we realize it afterwards when we're editing the episodes and then we have to go back and record a break to jam in there and pun it and paste. So look at us. We're growing. We're growing. I love it. All right. So next week we'll pick up with Tilt 6. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you took something from the conversation and we'll catch you next week. But in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.